Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Goaltending, where your why is bigger than your excuses. Today, we have an outstanding author joining us to talk about vertical development, mindsets, and ultimately how the two play a role in becoming better in our journey. Before I introduce our guests, I just want to say, as always, thank you for tuning in, allowing us to be a part of your journey. There are going to be some incredible takeaways today. I've had the opportunity to read the books that we're going to discuss today, and they are life-changing. They are something that will help build awareness in your journey and help you to work toward that, exactly what this third book is called, Becoming Better. And so make sure you all go like, subscribe, drop a 5-star review, comment with your thoughts and questions to really join the conversation. Let us know what you think on the topics we're discussing today. Go check out the books that we're going to talk about today and drop comments and questions you have on those. We would love to connect with you here about all of that, be a part of the growth in your journey. So to get right into our guest, he is a cutting-edge leadership development author, a researcher, a consultant. He helps organizations vertically develop their leaders primarily through a focus on mindsets. And that mindset thing is like what really drew me in whenever I was first introduced to him. He's a Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author of Success Mindsets, The Elevated Leader, and his most recent book, Becoming Better. He's also a leadership professor at the College of Business and Economics at California State University, Fullerton. So honored to have you here today, Ryan Gottfredson. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Man, as you're saying all this, I'm thinking, I wish I had a cool accent because I think people would take me much more seriously if I did.
It's funny because I can't have a conversation without somebody saying, "Where are you from?" You have a little bit of a twang. But yeah, ultimately, before we even get into anything, I read your first two books about 2 years ago. And when I heard your third book was coming out, following your email chain, got super excited. Had the opportunity to even be involved in your like review process several months ago. And I have seen personally how it can change lives. Shared the book with other people, shared the concepts, seen the level of awareness that it can raise. And really that's what it's about, like to be able to shift. It all starts with like that gaining awareness, and the books are so impactful in doing that. And so today we're just going to get a little more into this third one, but we're going to bring out some topics, obviously, from the other books that draw in and how it all ties together. So one of the things that stood out of my mind is like just starting with, can you tell us a little bit about explaining the difference between our doing side and our being side?
Yeah. So, and I appreciate you diving into these books. In fact, you're one of the first people that has read my new book. So I've been excited to talk to you knowing that you had read it. And and I imagine if you read my books, you've seen how my thinking has kind of progressed and developed along these lines. And what I've come to learn is that we have two different sides of ourselves. And in fact, to kind of help people understand this fact, I'm gonna share with you just some examples of some people, Will, and you tell me what you think these people have in common. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let's see. Let's do Michael Jackson, Bobby Knight, former head coach of Indiana basketball, Ellen DeGeneres, Bill Clinton, Tiger Woods. What do these people seem to have in common?
Like high-level performers.
Right? So these are high-level performers. They've been incredibly successful. They've essentially been at the pinnacle within the fields in which they operate within. Right? So that's surely one thing in common. But here's another thing in common, is that they all have some controversy around them. Right? And so why it's helpful to understand this is because we need to recognize, as I mentioned, we've got two different sides of ourselves. We've got our doing side. This is our talent, our knowledge, our skills, and our abilities. And that's what these individuals had in spades, incredibly talented individuals, and that's helped them to be successful. But then what we've got to ask ourselves is, does the controversy associated with these individuals, does that have to do with their doing side or with something else? And it's something else. And so there's another side that we oftentimes don't really think about, and that side is our being side. So our being side is the quality of our internal operating system. It's the quality of our internal wiring. So it's connected to our character, our psyche, our mindsets, our emotional intelligence, and our emotional regulation abilities. And so when these people have misstepped, it's been because of effectively emotional regulation issues and not their talent, knowledge, skills, and abilities. So this new book is all about helping people awaken to the fact that they have a being side, to help them to gauge their altitude along their being side, and then figure out how to elevate along their being side.
Yes, and it's done very well. One of the things, so like just in that being side piece, I'm sitting here, obviously, like as I'm reading the book, I'm thinking about my personal journey and like, how does this relate to me? How do I take away from this? And you share a story in your introduction, directly related to the being side, but how you ultimately stepped on the becoming better development path without even realizing it at the time. And that stood out to me so much because that related significantly to my journey. Like, I started becoming better and didn't realize it. I realized I needed to, but just stumbled upon the path. And so can you just talk a little bit about how and why failure is what opened the door to becoming better, and how common it is for failure to be what opens that path for people?
Yeah. So one of the things that we need to know is that we can put some terms on this idea of doing side and being side. So if we think about this as doing side on the x-axis and being side on the y-axis, then what we understand is that development along the doing side is what we call horizontal development. Development along the being side is what we call vertical development. And I'm going to say 95% of development efforts focus on the doing side. They're horizontal development. There's very small percentage of development efforts focused on the being side. I mean, you think about our education systems, our athletic programs, and most of our organizational development efforts. It's all doing side development. And so the reason why, so when we understand this, then an interesting statistic is that developmental psychologists have learned that of all adults, generally, or as a whole, 65% of adults never develop in adulthood. And what that really is aligned with is 64% of adults never really develop along their being side. And so it begs the question, why do some people develop along their being side? Well, it usually isn't because they know about their being side and they focus on it, because most people don't know about it and they don't focus on it. Right. I think if we did know about it, or more people knew about it, we would see a much lower percentage, or I'll say it this way, a much higher percentage of adults that do develop along their being side. So most adults never develop along their being side. But some of us do. And so then we get to ask the question, well, why or how? And what the research has found is that developing along our being side generally takes that we encounter what is termed a heat experience. So a heat experience is oftentimes some form of a failure or a trial or a crisis. Now, don't get me wrong. I think almost everybody experiences failure, trials, and crises. But that doesn't mean that we harness those to become better, to elevate along our being side. But there's some of us who maybe we fail enough. I know that that's part of my journey. I fail enough. It's kind of like, oh my goodness, I got to figure out a different way to operate. And just by kind of sheer partly luck, partly determination, is we end up focusing on development efforts that do help us better regulate ourselves, to heal our body so that we can elevate along our being side. So for me, let me give you some examples of some of these failures. My biggest goal in high school was to play college basketball. That didn't happen. When I was in my doctoral program, I failed my first set of comprehensive exams. When I went out into the working world, I took a job at Gallup as a consultant, and I got fired from that job. I never thought I would get fired. Mm-hmm. And in each of these circumstances, I know that I had the talent, knowledge, skills, and abilities to be successful with my goals, but I still wasn't. And the reason why, and I came to learn this the hard way, was because my being side was what was the issue. It wasn't my doing side, it was the being side. And so what I find when I work with leaders in organizations, when I do coaching, is most of the time when people feel stuck or stalled, it is almost every time it's because of an issue on their being side, and they just aren't focusing on it yet.
I like that. I like that a lot, and I like those examples. I think that definitely at some point in everybody's life, like we fail at something. Being in the military, there is a common saying of like you learn through repetition or trauma, and you talk about trauma in the book as well, but that almost when we're talking about failing a lot of times, it almost thinks me that repetition of failure. It doesn't say repetitively being perfect every time, just repeating something. So through repeating that failure, it almost requires you to, eventually become better, or to have a failure that is so traumatic that it requires you to become better. Possibly, that just kind of popped in my head. So part of it, in that becoming better, you said it's about upgrading our internal operating system, right? And
Yep.
I love the section where you get into 6 functions of how our internal operating system works. I don't want to give all those out. I want people to go check out your book. But would you highlight, 1 or 2 of like the 6 functions you discuss in terms of how our internal operating system works?
Yeah. So we got to first recognize we do have an internal operating system, and it operates largely below our consciousness. So just as a computer has an operating system, right? So if I type on my keyboard, I'm going to see the letters that I type show up. It's just automatically going to happen. We also have some automatic responses in terms of how we interact with our world. And it's all based upon how our body's nervous system operates. So how our nervous system operates is we have senses, right? Sight, touch, taste, smell. And these senses are consistently sending messages through our nervous system to the base of our brain. Then in the base of our brain, we've got parts of our brain that determine, do I send these senses into the brain for further processing, or do I ignore them? Right? So most of the signals that get sent to our brain, our body actually ignores. But there's some of these where it then sends it in for further processing. So we've got information coming in to our body. That information can be filtered into our brain. Then once it's filtered in, the first job of our brain is to assign meaning to those signals. And then, based upon the meaning assigned to those signals, our body will automatically respond. So let me give you an example of this. Will, how would you say most people respond to constructive criticism? They get what? Defensive, right? See, we got the signal coming in. I'm receiving constructive criticism. This is important. Let me filter it into my brain. As soon as it gets filtered in, our brain normally, for most people, automatically makes meaning of it as this is an attack. And when our body and brain make meaning of this constructive criticism as attack, well, how does my body respond? Naturally and automatically, it gets defensive. Mm-hmm. It puts up a shield of some form, right? And so that's an automatic knee-jerk response that is a part of our programming. But here's the thing about this, right? And this is really the important part of the becoming better process, is we've got to become aware of our programming. How is our body programmed to interact with the world? And it's really only until we become aware of our programming that we then have the capability of upgrading our programming, right? Because what I can do is I could develop the skills to slow down my processing, that when I receive constructive criticism, I could slow down and I could make meaning of it, not as an attack, but as something that might help me to become a better value creator in the future. This is something I can learn and grow and develop from. And doesn't mean I have to agree with it, but my body now creates the space to sit with it. And when my body can do that, then I could respond in a much more productive way. And all of that is controlled and regulated by our body's nervous system. So this is, again, we kind of mentioned this or talked about this multiple times, but doing this being side work is all about refining our body's nervous system.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I like the way that you describe it in the book. What helped me understand it is that that being side being either wired for self protection or value creation. That's kind of like what I was like. Oh, okay, like that helped drive home the point for me is understanding like naturally we want to self protect, meant to be a good thing. Like it derives from a good place, but a lot of times we're not actually being attacked or in the danger that our mind tells us that we need to process that information as. And when we realize that and can process, like notice and shift to different, we're able to create value in those situations. That's kind of what I took away from that piece.
Well, let me give a couple more examples of this, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So most of the work that I do in terms of my consulting and my coaching is with business leaders. And one of the things that I've come to learn is that, and hopefully most people have heard of the difference between fixed and growth mindsets. Growth mindsets are a signal that we are more wired for value creation. We are higher up on our being side. When we have a fixed mindset, we're more wired for self-protection and we're lower on our being side. So when I work with leaders, I found that on average in organizations, 60% of leaders have a fixed mindset. And what that means is that these leaders, their bodies are wired to avoid failure because they want to avoid looking bad. And that is a short-term self-protective strategy, right? If I choose to only do the things I know will be successful, well, I'm going to always look good. Mm-hmm. But I'm probably not going to learn, grow, and develop and become a better value creator. And so this is a common struggle that I see with leaders. So that's one organization. Do you want to say anything on that before I give the second example?
No, I'll let you keep riding. There's an example in the book that I liked, and I might bring it up after this example if you're okay with it.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. So the second common example, and I leverage Brene Brown quite a bit in the book. So if anybody's read Brene Brown's books, I love her writing style because she's so authentic about her becoming better journey. And one of the things that she is very transparent about is that for most of her life, her body has been wired to avoid vulnerability. Well, why would we avoid vulnerability? Well, because it protects us, right? Vulnerability is naturally something that exposes us to feelings of being uncomfortable. And so she says for most of her life, she avoided vulnerability and that kept her safe and protected. But what she's come to learn as she's elevated along her being side is that while vulnerability keeps us safe and protected, while avoiding vulnerability keeps us safe and protected, it prevents us from living wholeheartedly. That's her language. And so what she's just such a great example of somebody who is elevated along their being side because she's gone from being wired to avoid vulnerability as a self-protective strategy to being somebody who's willing to be vulnerable because that's a value creating strategy. And the only way to move the needle on that is to elevate along our being side. So hopefully those two examples help bring to life this continuum from being wired for self-protection to being wired for value creation.
Yeah, and when I think of the awareness, like the whole point is to build that awareness. When you realize that although you thought it was protecting you, that it's not creating value. If you can gain that awareness, I think that's one of the things that help to open the mind to, okay, even though I think I'm protecting myself, now that I understand it's not creating value, maybe I can do some work to make an adjustment and to shift. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you're stepping into the trickiest part of elevating along our being side. The trickiest part about this is whether we are wired for self-protection or value creation, it feels right and it feels good to us, right? So even if somebody is really low on their being side, they're really self-protective, they think that that's okay, that's, in a certain level, it is okay. It's just holding them back from being the person that they want to be. So that's the trickiest part that I find about helping people work on their being side is most people aren't really willing to see or admit their being side self-protective tendencies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Myself included.
Right.
So.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely. I felt called out a few times in the book, and I was like, yeah, I do need to work on that. And one of those pieces actually was the attachment styles piece, which I know that attachment styles are not, a new concept. Like, and we can talk a little bit about what each of the 4 attachment styles are, just to kind of introduce listeners to the concept if they haven't heard of them. But I definitely realized as I was reading through, I definitely grew up with an anxious attachment style, very much so, and have definitely progressively developed, some to a more secure attachment style, but definitely the anxious tendencies pop out,
Sure.
from time to time. And so I definitely, that hit home with me. And can you talk a little bit, just about the 4 attachment styles and how to grow toward a more secure style if you become aware, that you are on one of those other 3 styles?
Yeah, so one of the things that I tried to do with this book is, of course, I'm trying to help people awaken to their being side altitude. And there's a variety of different frameworks out there that can allow us to connect to our being side altitude. So there's different, we call them vertical development levels. We talked about mindsets. We've already mentioned that in our conversation. Mm-hmm. Another way to kind of gauge our altitude on our being side is by considering the width of our window of tolerance. How easily is it for us to be triggered? So these are all different frameworks for us to consider our altitude along our being side. And attachment styles is one of these things that we could use to kind of gauge our altitude along our being side and how self-protective we are. So the idea behind attachment styles is that the closeness of our bonds between us and our primary caregivers as children will come to shape how wired our bodies are for self-protection versus value creation. So people who have really healthy bonds with their caregivers will develop what is called a secure attachment style. That kind of means that we kind of allow people to come in and out of our lives in a very healthy way. And then there's 3 other attachment styles that are less healthy. So there's anxious and avoidant. Those are 2 different styles that are kind of at the same level. We just operate differently. So people who are more anxious, when they're in a relationship with somebody, there's almost like got this undercurrent of fear that their partner is going to leave them. And so they want to kind of grab hold, and they're a little bit more anxious about that relationship. Then there's avoidant attachment styles, which is I've been hurt by people in the past, so I want to kind of keep people at a distance, and that's going to help protect me. So that's kind of more of an avoidant. And then there's a disorganized attachment style, which is really the combination of anxious and avoidant. So this is right. People who are disorganized, they really want intimacy, but then once they get it, it really scares them, and so they push them away. And so it's kind of people with more disorganized attachment styles tend to have more chaotic relationships. And so this hopefully you could sense as I kind of walk through these is that the as you go from secure down to disorganized, there's a range from being more value creating to being more self-protecting. And so Will, you're like me where, man, I'm kind of halfway through my halfway through my adult life. I'm into my adult life. At least for me, I was married for about 10 years before I even learned about attachment styles. I start learning about it and I'm thinking, oh crap, right? I've got more of an avoidant attachment style. And I just thought that my way that I connect with my wife and with others was like the best way. And then as I'm kind of learning about this, I'm starting to see I kind of unintentionally keep my wife at an arm's length. And as I'm learning about this, I'm thinking, man, our relationship is not what it could be because of my wiring, my own kind of deficiencies along my being side. And so since learning about this, I've had to kind of figure out, well, how do you go about improving your attachment style? Is that something we could do? And one of the things that I've learned going through the process for myself and learning about it from experts is ultimately what it takes is we've got to heal our minds, our bodies, and our hearts. I mean, the reason why I have an avoidant attachment style is because there were some issues that I had with my primary caregivers, my parents, right? I've got trauma in my past. And until I work on healing from that past trauma, I'm going to continue to be deficient when it comes to these attachment styles. And so for me, part of my journey has been working with a trauma therapist to try to heal from that past trauma. And to the degree to which I've done that, I feel, and I think my wife would say the same thing, is I've been more willing to let her in on a kind of emotional, physical, spiritual level, and has therefore led to a deepening in our relationship.
Yes, and that is awesome. Congratulations on the work that you all have done to make that progress, because that in itself, I mean, you're teaching about it, but you're showing through example. Like if you do the work, you can make these improvements. It doesn't ever mean that we're going to be perfect, but we're willing to put the work in. And so that's awesome to see.
Yeah. And I mean, you're right. It's the work, but here's what's unique about this, right? This work, this being side work is different than any of the development work that we're used to, right? It's going to feel different. It's going to look different. And at a really deep level, that may mean working with a therapist, right? And it's just a different type of work than, I'm used to playing sports. Like I could go out on the basketball court. I know how to develop my shot. I know how to develop my ball handling. I just got to work hard. Well, when it comes to elevating along our being side, it's not really about working hard. It's not really about putting in hours. It's really about rewiring and healing our body's nervous system. And it just takes different effort. I mean, at a really simple level, it's meditation. At a really deep level, it's working with therapists. And in the middle, it's doing mindset work. So those are a few of the strategies that kind of the book ends with. We've got surface level strategies, deeper level strategies, and deepest level strategies. And so hopefully those will kind of open the door for folks to do more being side work.
Oh yeah. I really enjoyed the explanation of the different therapy styles also that you present in the book. And what I'd actually like to do is I want to encourage people to go buy the book when it comes out. What's the date that it's dropping on?
Well, technical date is June 26th, but I think it might be available before then. So I'm not sure when this podcast will launch, but check out Amazon. It might be there.
Absolutely. So we'll get this out and we'll make sure that there's a link that you all know where to find it. You all get the book because the therapy strategies available that can help you with healing from trauma, with dealing things in your past, with becoming better, outstanding explanation of them, as well as getting into the ADHD piece. Something that you and I chatting before the call, talked about, and your own personal journey with recognizing ADHD and your wife. Do you want to share a little piece of that, or would you rather save it for get the book and check it out?
Well, let's just chat about why it came up in the book,
Yeah,
right? So, as I'm learning the more and more about our being side and how people can differ in altitude along their being side, it's making me wonder, well, what causes people to differ in their altitude? And one of the things that I've learned, for myself personally and through my research, is that trauma is something that causes people's bodies to become more wired for self-protection, right? And that makes sense to me. But then I'm wondering, well, what other factors impact our being side? And what I've come to learn, because we were starting to have see some emotional regulation issues with our daughter. And so we got encouraged by our therapist to, hey, maybe she should get tested for ADHD. So we got her tested, and she comes back that she has ADHD. And as we're learning about it, my wife is like, I might have ADHD. And so she goes and gets tested and come to find out she has ADHD. So as I'm learning about this, one of the things I've learned is that 75% of adults who have ADHD do not know they have it. But so as I'm learning about this, is ADHD is a neurodivergency. And it means that there's wiring related issues going on in our brain that inhibit how we operate in our world. And these wiring related issues do cause people with ADHD to be more wired for self-protection. That's kind of one of the natural bodily responses to having some of these wiring deficiencies. And so if we've got them, and here's the good news, is if we have ADHD or some of these wiring related issues, it doesn't mean we can't do something about it. In fact, what I've learned, and through my wife's experience, is we've learned we can do something about it. We could actually engage in some different therapy approaches or resources that can help us to strengthen some of the neural connections in our brain that are just weaker than what people without ADHD have. So just to be clear on that, what research has found, neuroscientists have found, is that there's certain brain regions in our brain that control our processing. And when people have ADHD, they have weaker connections in these brain regions. Well, those are things that we can strengthen. And so the book talks about ways in which we could do that. So that's why ADHD popped up, is it's a factor that impacts our being side altitude.
yeah, and I mean, once again, everything about raising awareness. That stood out to me so much, that there's so many adults that have ADHD and aren't even aware of it. With not being aware of our mindsets, with not being aware of our level of development, whether or not we're being self-protective or value creating. So love all of the content in the book. I want to give you the opportunity real quick as we close out this part one. Is there anything that you would like to highlight, promote? Do you have any events coming up? And I will make sure that I drop a link for people to be able to access not only Becoming Better, but your other books as well, so that they can get them.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, just to help people with this awareness, is I have on my website, which is ryangottfredson.com, I have 2 self-assessments. One's a personal mindset assessment, and another is what's called a vertical development assessment. And both of those are tools to help us gauge and evaluate our altitude along our being side. So I think that's the first place for people to go. Check that out. Do those assessments. They only take about 5 minutes. You'll get an individualized report. And then if you want to do being side work, well, I'd love to connect with you further and see if I can help you out.
Yeah, that's and those assessments are completely free. I remember checking them out 2 years ago, the first time that we talked, and a really great way to visualize, raise that awareness of where you stand on both of those. I'll make sure the links to them are in the show notes as well. Just want to thank you very much for the time. Thank you all for tuning in, allowing us to be a part of your journey. Like, obviously you can tell, like, this is our opportunity to create value through helping others gain awareness and find ways to create value and become better leaders. So make sure you all go like, subscribe, Comment with your thoughts and questions to join the conversation, and let's grow.